I'm going to say welcome to everybody for the recording. And for those of you that are joining us after the fact watching the recording, we're glad you are taking time in your life to consider the question of how do you stay well as a caregiver. Just a note, this video is going to be available on our YouTube channel, and Chin will later on at some point just post that link in the chat box. If you have questions, please put them in chat, and we'll take time at the end of this conversation to address as many questions as we can get to. My name is Bill Harder, and I work as program manager for the Palliative Care Society of the Bow Valley, based out of Banff, Canmore, and reaching out to Lake Louise and down as far as Minitini and over to Kananaskis, and sometimes across the province and sometimes across the country. Our conversation today is really about self-awareness. I'll momentarily share some slides with you, but before I do, I want to plant a couple of seeds. And the first is, how do you personally know how well you are? And how does that awareness come up for you? That's at the root of this question for us, not really just as caregivers, but as human beings, members of families, members of communities. And how can we tell if our tank is full enough for ourselves? Only by what we choose to measure that by. But how do we know if our tank is full enough? So today's conversation is going to take a look at some tools to aid us in being aware of that tank level, and a few of the dynamics of what happens to our whole being when the level in that tank gets a bit too low. Oh, and I want to thank you for your patience. I have managed to contract, a flu or a cold or something. So I will do my best to mute myself when my cough reflex is getting active, but you may get an earful if I'm not quick enough. So I'm just going, and the other thing is, we'll just ask you to remain muted, and then you can unmute at the end for questions and comments, etc. So with your permission, I'd just like to dive in, and I'm going to screen share, so give me one quick moment for that. And just a quick thumbs up if you can see my screen. Excellent, thank you. So the title today, Thriving as Caregivers. And thriving is a really different word than surviving. There are times in life when the demands of life are such that all we can do is survive. We can just hold on, keep our head above water at best. And, that's amazing when we make it through those periods of time. What we really want, though, is to be in that space where whatever it is that life gives us, we have the potential to thrive, to deepen ourselves as a human being and to grow. Imagine, if you will, that you have a dashboard for your life, like this beautiful old Roadster, a bunch of dials and knobs and little lights that tell us things about the condition, in this case, of the car. Is the oil temperature acceptable, the oil pressure, the engine temperature, the speed, the RPMs, all these things. And as we drive along, the vehicle is giving us feedback about its condition. Well, we have a little bit of a dashboard within us as well. Through our thoughts, what we experience as feelings, what our bodies are doing, what our giblets are doing. All of this, in a way, is a constant feedback loop for us that just says, it's an invitation that says, pay attention a little bit, please. This is important information. We're here in this room together because we're caregivers of some form. And Caregivers Alberta defines caregiving as anyone who supports someone with an illness or a disability, or who's caring for an aging friend or a family member. This is a caregiver. caregiving can be as intensive as living with the person you're caring for, or as simple as driving someone you are supporting to a doctor's appointment or mowing their lawn. So there's a broad range of what caregiving looks like. Sometimes it's professionals, clearly, right? Might be our volunteer role, and it might be a part of our personal relationships. When we think about our own caregiving role, and I'm not asking for verbal feedback, just for us to sit with this for a moment. When you think about your role as a caregiver, what's the first emotion that arises, that gut feeling? Whatever that is, I encourage you to be gentle with yourself, whether it's a pleasant emotion or a difficult to sit with emotion. That simple question is the first part of attending to our dashboard. When I think about my role as a caregiver, what's the first emotion that arises? And it doesn't need to be fixed or changed. It's just an opportunity for listening to ourselves. And one other question that can arise for us, especially at the beginning of a conversation like this, is, as a caregiver, I need, and what would we fill that in with? Do we have awareness of and access to the resources and supports that allow us to thrive in our role? These guys are tricky. I don't mean the cast of Friends, I mean emotions. We, as a species, have a great plethora of emotions available to us. And when our tank, our metaphorical tank, is a little bit on the low side, we tend to generate a lot of emotion, and sometimes it's hard to know what to do with that. There are a number of sources of wisdom literature worldwide that remind us that all of these experiences, these emotional experiences, are friends coming to visit. Sometimes they come uninvited. They always come with something important for us to take note of. If we're resentful, that voice might be coming to say, maybe we didn't honor our own boundaries. If there's fear, maybe it's saying to us, we need to take stock of what is at risk for us. In any case, if we're going to attend to our personal dashboard, the invitation from our own self is, as author Frank Ostaseski would say, welcome everything, push away nothing. We're just going to, for a moment, take a look at two words and a little bit of definition. They're related words. However, the road that they take us on ends up in two very different places for us as caregivers. Let's take a look first at empathy. In the broadest term, it means to feel with someone, feeling the pain or suffering of another person as if it's your own. There is some similarity to sympathy. However, sympathy tends to have an aspect of poor you or it sucks to be you. We still feel what the other person's feeling, but we don't own it in the same way. So when you're empathic, you see maybe an animal that's hurting, and you feel that inside you, almost like you've become that creature. When somebody that you care about has physical pain or mental pain, you feel that in you, and it's heavy on you. That's empathy. The other word, compassion, is the ability to recognize the suffering of another. And so you see that creature or that friend or family member, you recognize their pain. However, you don't take it on as yours. It doesn't end up residing in you. And the difference between empathy and compassion in these definitions is that compassion has a very real and authentic desire to relieve the suffering of others where it's possible. And if we can't relieve it by our work with that person to literally take it away, sometimes what we do is we sit in the pain with them. But we also know that at the end of that, we walk away and we don't take their pain with us. I want to say that this is probably the second most crucial element to healthy caregiving. The first being aware of our dashboard. If we don't listen to ourselves, we have no hope of attending to our own need of changing that level of our wellness tank. The second most important thing is to recognize what is ours and what is not. We will generate our own needs within us in our lifetime, our growing edges, our joys, our sorrows, our losses, our growth. And we own that. We have a responsibility to do the work to evolve ourselves, to ripen. We do not, however, have the right to take somebody else's pain or growth, which is why empathy takes us down a road that will ultimately weigh us down heavily, probably wear us out completely. Because empathy is the energy of seeing that suffering, feeling it like it's mine, and when I leave that person or that situation, that suffering comes with me. I've internalized it. Compassion sees the suffering, takes a look to say, what can be different here? And acknowledges this suffering doesn't belong to me. It can be a difficult concept for us to integrate into ourselves, but when we begin to realize it's not about being selfish in a negative way or uncaring, it is about honoring that this person, my care receiver, they have deep resources. Even if their suffering is great, they must do their work, and I must do mine. And where our paths cross, we will jointly work together to relieve or alleviate suffering. So let's talk about this wellness take. Here we have an image of a cut crystal vase. This is you and me. We're amazingly beautiful, brilliant, shining, light reflecting, and all of that. And this is our wellness tank. There's one tank for our whole life. The tank includes our wellness at work, at home, in the community, with our intimate relationships, with our friends. One tank. The top of the tank doesn't have a lid on it because the things that nurture us, that make us feel alive, they pour into the top of this wellness tank. Now you can see on the bottom half of this tank, there's holes, and the tank's built that way because we let that which nurtures us pour out to touch our community. Sometimes in very intentional ways, maybe at work or in your volunteer roles. And sometimes it's just a matter of fact of being the beautiful gift we are to the world. You can see that red arrow is pointing to the top, indicating good life exists when we have as high a level in that tank as we're capable of. When that wellness level gets below, let's say, half or so, gets down to where those holes are, those holes start sucking air, and it hurts. What I'm really saying is, just because I'm tired or burnt out doesn't mean that the people around me stop needing who I am. And there becomes a downward cycle. When I realize I don't have the energy, I don't have what I need to take care of my family or my work colleagues or my clients or my friends, I might feel resentful, frustrated, angry, all the things, because I can't seem to get enough energy in me. I can't raise my tank. I don't know how to do it. Our work really then is in self-awareness, in looking at that dashboard. It's to acknowledge, first of all, what is the level of that tank, and not with judgment, just to say, I think it's pretty high and I'm doing great, or it's a little low and I could use a top up. and then to understand what is it that pours into my life that actually nurtures it. Now there's a second tank. It's the stress tank. It has a lid on the top, and it's a direct correlation, a teeter-totter between the two levels. When my wellness tank is really high, my stress tank will naturally be low. And when my wellness tank is low, my stress tank gets really high. And in fact, the lower my wellness tank is, the more pressurized that stress tank becomes. And all of a sudden, in a moment, it can explode. And this black gooey tar can get all over everything. While our attention isn't necessarily on our stress tank, it's there. What really draws us is that wellness tank, that beautiful wellness tank. Here's a few bits from the dashboard. And before I go through this list, I want to just give the disclaimer that this is not meant to be a source of self-judgment. If we experience some of these symptoms or expressions of tiredness, it's not from failure. In fact, I would say it's actually the opposite. It's more like we gave of ourselves so much in our caregiver role, and we didn't stop to ask how we're doing or fill our tank, and we gave ourselves until we were almost empty, and now we hurt. I would say it's a remarkable expression of selflessness when this happens. It just isn't optimal. Caregiver fatigue, or empathic strain as it's sometimes called, is a deep erosion of our ability to access our compassion, to be in the strong emotions or difficult stories of others. In this fatigue, we start seeing changes in our both personal and professional lives. We can become dispirited, increasingly bitter. And there's a real obvious reason for that. That tank of wellness is going lower and lower. We have fewer reserves, less resilience, and we don't know how to change it. Virtually every helper who cares about someone will develop a certain amount of this fatigue. Karen Sack-Whitney was a nurse back in the 80s, working in the 80s and 90s to start give words to this experience. Dr. Charles Figley, another early researcher in the area, said, frankly, it's the cost of caring. The more we care for people around us, the faster the level in our tank goes down, which is okay if we know how to equally increase what's going into ourselves, that nurturing piece. And Dr. Naomi Raymond, who has a really lovely book called Kitchen Table Wisdom, I think it is. She's a doctor, medical doctor in the States who worked in palliative care. And she said, we can't walk through water without getting wet. And Francois Mathieu, who's a Canadian researcher from Kingston, said this is a gradual erosion of all the things that keeps us connected. Our empathy, our hope, our compassion, our basic care for ourselves and others. When our tank gets too low, we disconnect not only from the people around us, but from our own being. Here's Dr. Raymond's full quote. The expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. When we feel tired, worn out, even sometimes hopeless, this isn't failure. It's the natural consequence of being human in relationship with people who suffer. As that tank level goes down, or as it goes up, we will see changes in ourselves physically, in how we act, in how we think, and though not listed, certainly in how we feel. there's a tiredness on the inside. And this is one of the first signs. It's not so much that we couldn't go for a really long walk. It's more like, well, I just don't have the motivation to start the walk. Oops, sorry. Insomnia or hypersomnia. So I have trouble going to sleep, or I never feel like I'm rested enough. Headaches and migraines, increased susceptibility to illness, right? So our immune system is compromised. And emotional distress that's translated into physical symptoms. So I feel anxious and my gut is tight, or I'm having headaches or nausea from stress. And finally, this anxiety or hypervigilance about our physical state. We might be consulting Google Doctor an awful lot and feel like we've got all the things that were ever diagnosed in anybody. Research suggests like virtually anything going on in our physical system can be connected to distress, prolonged distress, and heightened moments of anxiety. Just to pause for a moment and to say again, when we experience these things, this is not a failure on our part. It's simply the dashboard telling us something. If you think back to that graphic I showed you a few slides back of the car, if one of the warning lights comes on that tells you the oil pressure is low, it's not a failure of the warning light. It's just the light doing what it's supposed to. It's communicating to the driver. When you get a chance, pull over, check your oil level. When these things happen to us physically, psychologically, emotionally, soulfully, they are simply communications saying, maybe it's a good time to pull over and just check in with ourselves. Behavior signs and symptoms, increased use of alcohol and drugs. In other words, we hurt and we sedate. And sedation is not bad if it's mindful, if we're thoughtful and careful in the use of it, and return to the work and do the deep listening. But it can be very dangerous when we sedate so that we don't pay attention to what the dashboard's saying. Can lead, obviously, to addictions. In our various roles, we see absenteeism at work, in our volunteer roles, even pulling back from our intimate relationships. Anger and irritability. When we're a little bit like this, that's a good sign that our resilience is low, that we have emotionally thin skin that's very sensitive. And it's probably a good time for us to step back and ask, what would nurture my being? Exaggerated sense of responsibility. If I don't do this, nobody will. Like, I have to do it. Avoidance of certain clients or patients in professional roles, sometimes avoidance of people in our family or friend connections. An impaired ability to make decisions, forgetfulness, problems in our relationships, and silencing when we withdraw and become silent, or when we silence others because we can't bear to hear them. And then some of the ways we change in how we think. Emotional exhaustion, distancing ourselves, negative self-image, depression, a reduced ability for sympathy and empathy. We become cynical, resentful. We might feel helpless. I don't know what to do. I just literally don't know where to go for help. We might stop enjoying life. And we might become depersonalized and numb out. We have our worldview disrupted. Like what we think is of value, we might be challenged. Increased anxiety and fears, hypervigilance, loss of hope, increased sense of vulnerability. That inability to tolerate strong feelings. We used to enjoy certain kinds of movies or read certain kinds of books, and now we can't anymore because it activates a fear or anxiety response. Problems with intimacy, intrusive imagery. Especially for us who work in the field, we might find certain stories from clients or patients that really come back to us, and they're sticking with us. hypersensitivity to emotionally charged stimulus, and insensitivity. So either one, like I just don't care. I could watch the worst calamity happen, or I can't see somebody take a Band-Aid off and it puts me over the edge. So let's say, we have this gauge, this spectrum. Way over on the left is your tank is full, and look out world. Imagine just for a moment with me what you are like when your tank is in 3/4 or better full. What your personality is like, how people experience you, what you can take on in the world. How amazing that is. And what a gift you are to this world. Now imagine that we're in that middle section, the yellow bar. Our tank isn't dangerously low, but it's maybe down to 65%. And some lights have come on our dashboard, just saying, hey, we're okay, but we're a bit low. Maybe pull over and do a fill up. And this can happen in the course of a busy day, right? We might start out with a tank that's at 85 or 90%, and all of a sudden we come through a difficult experience, an interaction with our care receiver or something at work or in the community, or we watch the news or whatever. And all of a sudden we're just down a bit, right? And so at lunch we go for a walk, or we do some yoga, or we read a book, or whatever it is that fills our tank. And then we're back up. Sometimes it's happened over a period of time, weeks, months, even years, slowly eroding that tank level, and we haven't paid attention. And we notice one day, I'm firmly in the yellow zone. I'd like my tank to be higher. We want to avoid at all costs going into the red. That red zone is when we hurt emotionally, psychologically, and we can damage ourselves physically. The red zone is not the intention of life. Life isn't saying push yourself to the edge and die. And sometimes it happens. We're often not mentored well as caregivers to understand how to listen to ourselves. So I want to tell you a quick story. There once upon a time was a woman who worked in the construction industry. And at home, she had a beautiful 5-year-old son, a lovely partner, and her role in construction caused her to interact with some pretty crusty characters. In the morning, she would kiss her son goodbye and head off to work feeling good about what she did. She was good with her hands, skilled at her labors. And her son would watch her go, and her partner would watch her go. Sometimes at work, really hard things happened. Maybe the foreman would be frustrated, things might break, and a lot of stress could be on this person, this worker. When she comes home, every workday when she comes home, she walks underneath the branch of a great big old poplar tree that grew in the front yard. And she would reach up and just rub her hands along that tree just before she got to the house. And she'd open the door and her boy would come running and leap up into her arms. Her partner would hug her. And life was good. One day on the way to work in the morning, before she left the house, the little boy said, "Mom, how come every day when you come home, you rub your hands on that big old tree out front? Why do you do it?" And the mom said, "Oh, son, that's my worry tree." "Your worry tree? What's that?" "Well," she says, sometimes at work, I end up picking up a lot of worries. Hard things can happen, and it kind of weighs on me. I kind of take it home with me. But I don't want to bring it into the house. And it really doesn't belong to me. So I just hang it up on that branch. I just pretend to put it up there. And then I know I can pick it up the next morning if I need to. And the little boy says, that's a good idea. That's a really good idea. And then he says, but Mom, when you go to work in the morning, you never take your worries off of the tree. Oh, she says, I look for them, but they always disappear overnight. The story is meant to be a metaphor for us, reminding ourselves to develop a way to put down what we carry. Whether it's a caregiver work role or we live with our care receiver, we have to, at some point, have a way to say, I'm taking a break from that role. And all the weight of that role, just for a minute, for this sacred time, gets put aside. When I was working on site more, I always had my work name tag on, partly because I might forget who I am, frankly, but more likely because at the end of my day, I knew I was off duty when I took off my name tag and put it on my desk at home. That was my worry tree. And it wasn't that I didn't care about what happened to people when I took my tag off. I just gave myself psychologically and emotionally permission for that not to identify who I am at that moment. It can be as simple as something you have in your pocket that you take out sometimes, or something you hang on a doorknob, or, well, you can design it for yourself. But when we do this thing, we tell our whole being, for the next little while, I'm nurturing me. And it's so vital for our care receivers that we develop the tools of awareness to know what fills our tank. So that we're not going to pause here in the conversation, but it is the first of three pieces in a paradigm of self-care. And that first piece is for us to sometimes just literally stop, to pause in our day, and we have to ask ourselves some questions that invite an extreme honesty with ourselves. First of all, it's asking us to be mindful, which is basically keeping attention to the experience in the moment. Really, it's just saying, whoa, I think I'm going to turn my face toward the dashboard for a moment. This pausing is asking, how am I really doing? It's realizing I need to check in, and it can happen that fast. It's just, if we never have stopped in our life to ask that question, how am I doing? And to be very, very real with ourselves, we don't have to share that with anybody else. We have a hard time expanding and growing. Sometimes this question will take us into new relationships, new jobs, new communities, new endeavors, new possibilities. This question can end things, and equally, it can begin things. Sometimes asking that question, how am I really, is frightening for us, because we're only asking ourselves, so frankly, we already know the answer. And maybe the answer is, I'm having a really hard time, and I don't want to accept that that's true. Or maybe it is, I'm really flourishing, and I have space in my life for something new. The pause piece of this is very quick. It's walking down the hall one day or going out for a walk and just thinking, I really need to ask myself this question. There, that fast it happened. Breathe is what we do next. And by the way, taking a breath is a great way to start, just a long, deep breath. So we ask ourselves this question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how full is my tank? Where 1 is, damn near empty, and 10 is, look out world, here I come. Again, as best we can without judgment on what the response is. I'm going to invite you to do this right now. Not to share it, You don't need to write it down. Just simply ask yourself, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is low and 10 is optimal, how full is my wellness tank? You'll get a number. I don't know where the number comes from. I just know everybody I've ever asked gets a number. Gently sit with that number, whatever it is. On a scale of 1 to 10, how full is your tank? With compassion for yourself, sit with that number. Here's one of our great gifts we can give ourselves. Our own dashboard is speaking to us. If our number is a 4, the dashboard is saying, thank you for listening. Let's work together, your inner being in you. Let's work together to discover what nurtures us so that we can move that to a 6. Small increments. We're back to this, right? What is my dashboard telling me? There's nothing we can do about our situation until we've listened to ourselves. There's lots of good self-help material in our world. Incredible caregiver resources through Caregivers Alberta, Canada. There's international websites for caregivers that have tons of tools. All of them, though, start with, how am I doing? What's my 1 to 10? Then we can reach out to resources and find, what best suits our context, our personality, our interests, so that we avoid, at all costs, the possibility of an implosion or an explosion. In my role as a professional caregiver, there's been a few times in my life where I was not aware of this kind of information. And I was not listening to myself for long periods of time, years and years. When we get down to that low level of 2 or 3 or 1, our entire well-being is compromised. And the levels of pain that we experience there are unbearable. I do not wish for any of us to experience this. We can move up from that. We can move from a 1 to a 4 to a 6 to an 8. However, it takes a good village around us. It takes kindness and self-compassion and awareness. The first of this 3-part paradigm was pause. Just literally stop in your day and say, how am I doing? I think I need to ask myself some questions. The second part is to breathe into that question and to be willing to accept what's coming to you from yourself. Things are great, things are awful, whatever. The third part is to listen. So if I'm going to ask myself how I'm doing, it behooves me to actually respond to what has been said. So listening is about attentiveness to yourself. It's a commitment to change as needed. Maybe there's no change needed and you're really getting affirmative messages from your mind, your emotions, your body. Or maybe there's serious change needed. So listening is about letting go of some things and maybe beginning new things. And that takes courage on our part. It's about being ready for action or change or movement when life brings that opportunity to us. Essentially, if we're going to invite attention to our dashboard, the dashboard would like us to respond with integrity to what it says. It doesn't happen instantly, maybe, but we can learn to be more attentive to ourselves. And it comes back to just, what have I heard? The last image I'm going to share with you, or the last metaphor before we open it up for some Q&A, is about core values. Now, you may, as I am aware, notice that in this conversation we're having, I haven't given you lists of things to do to care for yourself. Frankly, it's extremely personal. Yoga might work for you, but not for me. There are oodles of resources available for you to explore how to engage the things that fill you with life. In this conversation, I simply want to be able to present to us the idea that we have the power for change within us as we invite awareness of what we actually are feeling and experiencing. And part of that's going to rest on our core values. So all of us in life generate values that guide our decisions, our perspectives, and our beliefs. Some of these we inherit from our family of origin, our culture, our experiences, and they change throughout our life. I don't have the same core values I had when I was 7, maybe not even when I was 20. They're not right or wrong, they're just simply mine. Now, most of us have never taken time to physically write down our core values in a journal or somewhere. It's a worthy endeavor just to say, what do I most value about relationships, self, belief, community, etc., finances, abilities. Imagine this jar is your life, this quart sealer. All of your life has to fit in there. And take a look at that. So this is somebody's life. Those big rocks at the top represent your most important values, your core values. The next size of rocks represents the most important decisions that reflect your values. The third size of rocks are sort of decisions that come off of decisions. And it goes down until you get down to the sand at the bottom, which is the minutia of life. Like, I need to do the dishes and pay bills and all the rest. Clearly, in this person's life, they have so much going on, they can't even attend to their core values. There's no space in their jar for those big rocks. Can you imagine how unmoored or unanchored we are in life when we don't honor our own core values? If a core value for me is nurturing my family and spending time with them, and I never actually get to see them, then I'm dishonoring my own core value. So how do we change this? What would we do if we were a support person in this person's life? Well, it's actually a fairly easy response. You see this jar? This jar actually literally contains the same volume of rocks and sand as this jar. Isn't that crazy? Do you know what's different? And some of you are saying the answer to yourselves. You put the big rocks in first. So you empty the jar out and you start putting in your core values. What do you do in life first? Every day, every week, every month, all year, is you do not ever step against your core values. You can change your core values, that's fine. But when you have adopted them and you understand them, you let them guide who you are. So if you put the big rocks in first, and then the next size of rocks, and then the smaller, and finally just pour the minutia of life in there and give it a shake, not only does it fit in, but look, you actually have some growing space at the top of your life. And it all starts by saying, I will make decisions that honor the values that I uphold in my life. When we do this, we start to understand what nurtures my life. Spending time outdoors, connecting with friends, a variety of hobbies, loving an animal. It's endless. But whatever it is, and here's how you know that it's something that nurtures your life. What are you doing when you feel most alive? What are you doing when you feel most alive? Because whatever that is you're doing, that's something that nurtures you, fills your tank, and honors your values. All of this dashboard metaphor is really about taking earnestly when there's a warning sign in us, and honoring that our whole being really wants us to thrive in this world. It wants us to be our best and highest self at any given moment, whatever that looks like. We want to be where Brene Brown has a great idea of the story I tell myself, meaning sometimes I create a story not based on external reality, and it can be a self-sabotaging story. Like, I'm too tired, I can never change. Nobody can help me. I'm not a good person. I'm a failure. These stories end up directing us. And Brene Brown would say, listen to the story you tell yourself and ask, is it the story that grows my life? And if it isn't, she says, you have the power to change your story with support, exploring resources. But all of us have the power to change the story we're saying. And this is our last slide. As a caregiver, let's say you are living with your care receiver. Maybe it's your spouse or a child. And it's every day. It's all day. It's heavy. How often we need to put our load down depends on the weight of the load. If I hold my arm out like this, just like that, I might be able to do it for 10 minutes. I don't know. I'm not a horribly strong physical guy. Maybe I could do that for 10 minutes. But eventually it'd be too hard and I'd have to put it down. But if I had a 5-pound weight on my hand, I'd maybe only to do it for a minute. If it was a 20-pound weight, I might do it for 12 seconds before I have to put that down and recharge. Our caregiver role is like that. It's not so much what is the role, it's how much is being asked of me, and therefore, how often do I need to take a break? And what does that look like? It might be 10 minutes at lunch. It might be a whole day once a week. So I'm going to stop the screen share there and invite comments or questions. Feel free to write them in the chat, or if it's preferable, you can unmute and just ask. And we have a few minutes to just kind of explore how this has sat with you and maybe what's arisen.